I'm not always late to the party, but when I am, I like to make a scene when I arrive.
We interrupt this video to bring you a special message from iFixit. Bring you iFixit by the makers of iFixit. Got a crappy graphics card? That's okay. Fix it with iFixit. iFixit has all the tools you need to make your life better. Got a dirty phone screen? That's okay. You can fix it with iFixit. Thirsty? That's okay. Fix that thirst with iFixit. Refreshing. Use iFixit to fix your computer or even just upgrade it. Cool. iFixit can fix anything, even this and this. Got a problem with your friend? Fix him too with iFixit. They'll appreciate it. Guaranteed.
Disclaimer, iFixit does not actually cause spills, fix friends, fix cars, fix tires, or fix things that are not designed to be fixed with iFixit tools. But that's okay, because iFixit is cool anyway.
To find out more, click the link in the description below.
Yeah, iFixit. Explosion.
Is it possible that AMD has found a way to cram this much performance inside of a console? All right, today we're obviously going to be talking about 2080 Ti is now old and slow. No, not really, but okay, we're going to be talking about the conversation that takes place every time a new console launches, and this is going to be the third major console release since I've started my YouTube channel, so this is going to be the third time I've seen the same arguments that are going to pop up, but this time it's different. Every time a new console launches, it ends up being a battle of the fanboys. The console gaming is better than PC, and then the PC master race, console peasant argument going back and forth. To understand why I feel like this one's going to be a little bit unprecedented is you have to kind of understand the way consoles have worked in the past. In the beginning, the Earth is round. So here's the Earth. When the Xbox 360 and all that came out a long time ago, they were not based off PC architectures. So when the Xbox One came out, it was one of the first times that we actually saw them move back to like the x86 architecture. And then, obviously we had PS4 and then Xbox One X and all that. And so it got to the point to where we were seeing consoles being derivative off of hardware that was already existing in the PC space. But all of that existed prior to AMD being disruptive to the entire industry when it comes to their CPU performance. AMD has also been trying to create a splash in, or at least create a dent in the market share and profits of NVIDIA with, obviously we had Vega graphics, which were a huge flop. And I'm sorry, even the biggest AMD fanboys out there have to admit Vega did not live up to the expectations that they were promised. It was HBM2 based off of the Fury series of graphics cards. And in fact, it even led to like straight up firings at AMD because of how badly it did. Ironically, now those people that were fired are now over at Intel helping their graphics division. So I don't think we have much to worry about over there. So anyway, moving forward from Vega though, came the launch of Navi. And Navi was promised to create the same disruption that we saw with Ryzen and what it did to Intel's market share and CPU shares with graphics. But what's funny is they launched the 5700 XT and then moved their way down from there, targeting mid-range and mid-range only. And they did bring competition to NVIDIA to the point to where NVIDIA actually launched extra graphics cards and the super lineup to just kind of put cards in between their current lineup, trying to remove any opportunity of buying an AMD graphics card. And with Ryzen doing so great, and us now on the cusp of 4000 series CPUs launching, everyone's kind of asking themselves, where is Big Navi? Well, if you've been paying attention to the consoles and that they're supposed to be coming out around Thanksgiving of this year, you know where Big Navi is. And it looks an awful lot like Big Navi is inside the Xbox Series X and potentially the PS5 as well. So let's go ahead and start with the specs of the new consoles. What I'm gonna also do is I'm gonna show you two PC builds to try and recreate the console hardware in a PC, which is extremely difficult for some proprietary reasons, and then what I think a comparable PC would be in terms of pricing. So there's two ways to compare it, spec for spec and price for price. And what's funny is they do not give you the same result, which is kind of scary. So in terms of the architecture, this is the Xbox Series X, and we chose this because it has the higher spec of the two consoles coming out, the PS5 obviously, compared to the Series X. Processor, they're AMD on both, but the Series X has an 8-core AMD Ryzen Zen 2 architecture at 3.7 to 3.8 gigahertz. And we looked that up and we found out that basically it is an 8-core 16-thread part, which means the minimum CPU you could go with to be spec for spec is going to be a 3700X. The funny thing is, if these consoles launch at the $500 price point that everyone's rumoring, that means half the cost of the console alone goes into that one part. Now, of course, there's an asterisk, and there's going to be an asterisk next to all of these parts. The 3700X has an up to 4.4 gigahertz turbo clock speed. You don't get those turbo clocks and whatnot with the console variant. And the reason why it says 3.7 to 3.8 is it's an 8-core, they're calling it an 8-core CPU because of that's how many physical cores are in it. But SMT, or simultaneous multi-threading, does exist on the consoles. But the developers have to either enable it or disable it, and I think that's going to be based on the game that you're loading. It's going to call up those instructions and be like, oh, this is an SMT title. So then it will downclock to 3.7 gigahertz. If it's just 8 cores, then it's going to be 3.8 gigahertz. It's funny though, because it's only 100 megahertz difference on paper, but apparently that's the difference between melting itself to death or not, because apparently there's also no throttling built in. These things just run at that clock speed to where the old school red ring of death, it will overheat itself to death. But the cooling situation in them seems to be pretty beefy. But here's the part that I just started alluding to. Prelude. Okay, yeah, well, that's what they're doing too. They're dancing all the way to the bank. So AMD's Navi RDNA 2 family of GPUs is launching in the Xbox Series X. 52 CUs running at 1.825 gigahertz with 12 teraflops of FP32. Now here's the thing. We tried to find a comparable graphics card on the market today that matches those specs. It was a 2080 Ti. So what we did in our comparison here is we basically said 5700 XT because it's RDNA 1, it's the highest end GPU you could currently buy with AMD. It has less CUs, it has higher clock speed though at just over 1.9 gigahertz. But considerably less teraflops. Now, teraflops are a terrible way to compare a graphics card architecture. You can't just say, oh, this graphics card has higher teraflops than this one, therefore it's better at gaming. No, it's better at that particular instruction set, not necessarily gaming. So there's the asterisk on that. The graphics card that we're speccing to be comparable to hardware is actually lesser than the one that's in here because there is no RDNA 2 for desktop yet. That's Big Navi, and it's right here, or right there, in a console. Video memory though. 16 gigabytes. Now the reason why it's so much megabytes of, or gigabytes of memory on the video is because it's GDDR6 and it's shared with the CPU. So instead of having dedicated system RAM and then VRAM, the VRAM is also the system RAM, which is smart because it's extremely fast versus conventional DDR4. So you're gonna have 6 gigabytes dedicated to the CPU with 10 gigabytes left over for the graphics. So, I mean, that's obviously going to be giving some sort of a performance benefit to the system. Doesn't need as much system RAM as you would in a PC because PCs do all sorts of different things, not just play games and or be a media box like this is inevitably going to be. Now, storage. PS5 actually has a faster storage solution than the Xbox Series X. But the Series X has 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, 2.4 gigabit per second, which is clearly not PCIe Gen 4, which is kind of funny because if they're going with AMD on all this, they could have probably gone Gen 4, but they didn't. It's also got a 4K Blu-ray drive in there, which I didn't even include on our PC list because it's really convoluted on the way 4K works with PC regarding HDCP and decoding and the encoder and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, it's going to be built into the box here. Now, I don't know if they're going to do like they're doing with PS5, where you can have a digital version or one that has a disk drive, and one that doesn't have a disk drive is going to be cheaper and all that. I don't know. The specs I came up with to try and make a comparable hardware spec system is an AMD 3700X with a B450M Bazooka motherboard. Cheapest motherboard I could find, honestly, just to try and keep the price somewhat reasonable. XFX 5700 XT, 16 gigabytes of G.Skill value memory. So that's 2 8 gigabyte sticks of non-heat sinked, super basic looking RAM because I'm trying to keep the price reasonable, like I said. Power supplies is where you're kind of screwed right now to try and get any sort of a reasonable price for building a console killer, because power supplies are expensive right now. Because of all the shutdowns that happened over the last 4 or 5 months, prices went up very expensive, nearly doubling in many instances, sometimes more. But we went with an EVGA 650N1 power supply, which is 650 watt, not even an 80 plus power supply, if you want to know the truth. I don't even think it's 80 plus white. Once I double checked it, still costs $70 for that power supply. For storage, we went with again, we tried to match the storage here because there's 2 drives, an NVMe and a 2.5-inch drive. So I went with a 1 terabyte Crucial P1 drive and a 1 terabyte Team Group SSD. The total price for these parts, $1,080. Twice the price of what's expected to launch with the Xbox Series X with a graphics card that doesn't even come close to matching what they have on paper. Now, obviously we need to wait and see what the practical performance of it's gonna be. You're not even gonna be able to directly benchmark it and compare it to PCs, because once again, it's all a proprietary solution that you can't run 3D Mark and all these different benchmarks on to physically say, here's how fast it is. But on paper, it's 2080 Ti territory in terms of performance, which is absolutely bonkers. So I then went, well, okay, if you wanna build a console killer PC, you can't. You can't this time around. It's insane, because for the first time, you are seeing new hardware families and performance and technologies launch on console first. Let that sink in for a minute. We'll talk at the end of this video why I think that is. But what if you wanted to build a PC for the same approximate price as this console? So we set out to be about a $500 to $550 PC. Because again, we still don't know exactly how much these consoles are. And Phil and I cannot, for the life of us, figure out how the heck they can make this work for that price point of $500. I honestly think it's gonna be more. And both companies are being extremely hush-hush. PlayStation being completely mums the word about anything, because I guess that's very typical Sony. Microsoft has been very vocal talking about these specs and that these are indeed the specs, but they haven't mentioned price. But let's say it was $500. So we went with a max of $550. AMD 3100, that also deserves a big fat asterisk in bold, italic, and 72-point font, because you can't buy the damn processor. That's one of those processors that they sent to us showing us how amazing they are. And the 3100 and the 3100X being what we said, the best budget gaming processors you could ever get your hands on. Okay, we lied.
Because you can't get your hands on them. Because AMD did the typical, here's some stuff that really doesn't exist because you can't buy it. And if you did, you got lucky because they haven't been replenished.
Which makes me mad when we go and show stuff like that, because it's so good, but you can't get it, and I don't know why. But because I do know it physically exists and we have it here in the studio, hypothetically, if you can get your hands on it for $100, the 3100, which is a 4-core, 8-thread, Ryzen 3000 series processor, Ryzen Zen 2 architecture, that's on our list, because for the $100, you cannot beat it. Again, the same exact motherboard, the B450M Bazooka. Now, in terms of graphics card, this is one where Phil and I kind of went back and forth on, we weren't sure which graphics card to go with, because in this price point, you're gonna be stuck with 4 gigabytes of VRAM. And you could step up the price a little bit and get 8 gigabytes of VRAM, which is obviously going to be beneficial. But anyway, to keep the cost low, I put the MSI, where is it? The Ventus GTX 1650 on here. It's 4 gigabytes, it's $154. You could spend more, but you're not gonna get necessarily more VRAM with it. You would step up potentially to a 1650 Super, but it would put us above our price point. Power supply, once again, power supply pricing being as dumb as it is, the only power supply that I could find that would get us within our price point and still have enough power, because we don't need a lot of power for this system, we need at least 400 watts, is the 430 watt Thermaltake continuous power supply at $50. And let's be honest, I would never put that power supply in any of my systems. I don't trust that particular power supply line. I've had Thermaltake power supplies in the budget range in the past that have given me problems, but again, for the price point, it's what we had to go with. Now for the storage, I went with a 2 terabyte Barracuda hard drive. It's a 7200 RPM, 64 megabytes of cache hard drive at $54. Because I'm the kind of person that cannot live day to day with a hard drive as a main drive, I also added in here a 250 gigabyte Silicon Power SSD. But at $29, it means that we can have our operating system and our favorite game on an SSD, letting our hard drive spin and be free to do whatever we ask it to do when we ask it to do it, not sit there and have to deal with all of the constant tasks that are running for the OS and then seek when you want to load a game and dealing with extremely long load and boot times. I think we need to do a video about this once and for all, where we show the true difference between how fast a hard drive is when it's not having to run the operating system. But Jay, what about just an HHSD or whatever, a hard disk hybrid drive? Well, we've had one of those as well, and they're also trash. And I know people are gonna get mad at that comment, they are trash. But that brings our total to $530. And a couple of things that you could adjust here is if you didn't want to run the SSD, and you're very adamant, I'm fine with a hard drive, I can turn on my computer, go make coffee, come back and still see the Windows spinning wheel, and I'm fine with that. You can take that $30 and then that brings us down to $500. If you've got a $550 budget, which is what I was trying to stay within, you could take that $50, add it to your GPU, and get a better graphics card. So you get better gaming performance at the sacrifice of waiting on your load times. Now we're gonna move into the portion of this video here where I predict. I predict Big Navi for discrete graphics will launch around the same time as the consoles. Because I think what's happening here is the reason why they're launching Big Navi and RDNA 2 architecture with the consoles is for the investors. It's for the stockholders. Because what it will allow you to do is to immediately show the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of units sold in Q4 of 2020. And that's great for investors. It makes investors happy, they invest more. In fact, it's gonna be easier to keep the shareholders happy when you've got Microsoft and Sony competing with each other, because AMD wins in both of those competitions. And then what's gonna happen is they're gonna launch the discrete graphics cards around the end of this year, around the same time frame. Then they're gonna be like, look how many graphics card units that we moved. And then you're gonna look good. Everyone's gonna be happy. Console gamers, PC gamers, or people like me who just like gaming, who own consoles and PCs, are gonna buy both. And then it's gonna look really good in terms of units sold. And if what we're seeing on paper for what they're putting in the consoles is any indicator of what to expect when it comes to discrete graphics cards with RDNA 2, NVIDIA better truly have something big for their 3080, because one thing I didn't mention is all of this power is running on a 315 watt power supply in the console. Now sure, it's probably not gonna be as loaded in terms of power draw as, and my eyes are really drying out with this light, so you just got to deal with it. It's not gonna be as much power draw, obviously, as a desktop system. It's optimized.
They locked all the clocks.
Yeah, so like Phil just said, they locked all the clocks, and I said that earlier. They don't throttle, they don't move, they don't boost up to nothing. It's 1,825 megahertz for the GPU and 3.7 or 3.8 for the CPU, and that's it. So they can optimize and spec a power supply specifically for that scenario. And consoles are optimized. The games all run on the same hardware. The developer can optimize for that. And PCs are always different because of the fact that there are so many endless combinations of hardware out there. You always have to sort of optimize for the lowest common denominator when it comes to what games and stuff can run. But on consoles, it's truly optimized. So I'm really curious as to what's gonna happen with Big Navi when it comes out on discrete graphics, because they can then really beef it up, because you've got bigger power supplies available to you, you've got more cooling available to you. Heck, the graphics card alone will probably have a bigger cooler than the entire Xbox Series X is gonna have for both the CPU and the graphics card. It's exciting, and I hope to see people embracing the improvements of console, because that always leads to further improvements of PC and vice versa. So we haven't talked about the new consoles and stuff, but I think if this shows you the fact that you cannot build a console killer for anywhere near the same price, and you gotta spend $1,000 to build anything even close to comparable to the Xbox Series X. All these videos out there of people using the NZXT H1 going, I built the Xbox Series X. No, you didn't. Shut up. You didn't come anywhere close to it.
Unless you put a 3800X and a 2080 Ti in there.
Yeah, it's good. I'm gonna buy one. I mean, I'm not one of those people that's like PC master race, console peasant. I'm a console master peasant.
Console PC master peasant race.
Console PC master peasant race. I like games. Anyway, what do you guys think about the new consoles? Put your comments down below. Do you think they're gonna launch at $500? I have a really hard time understanding how they could do that. Well, Jay, they've always lost money on consoles. I have a hard time believing that Lisa Su would allow that to happen. I have a feeling that they're at least gonna launch at cost. I don't think they're gonna lose any money. But man, what do we have to look forward to in 2021 for computers?
Imagine a $250 2080 Ti.
No. Jen's son would sit there with his leather jacket proudly sinking with that ship rather than lower the price.
His leather jacket probably costs more than $250.
His leather jacket would keep him afloat. It's his floaty device.